Hey there, welcome back to the program. Paul and I got a good guest for you today. Her name is Ann Killion. She's best known as a sports journalist. She's written for Sports Illustrated, Los Angeles Times, and currently writes for the San Francisco Chronicle. She's also written books, Throw Like a Girl with Jennie Finch and Solo with the soccer player Hope Solo. But there's more to Ann Killion than just her writing. She's just a sweet, interesting storyteller who shared her time with us, not once but twice. You'll hear about that in just a moment. We had a great time talking to her and kind of getting to know what it was like here in the Bay Area when she grew up. Her parents are great. They sound like total treasures of people. And yeah, just had a good time talking to her. I think you'll have a good time listening to her. And that's it. I'm going to get out of the way and let you listen to our conversation with Ann Killion. Ann Killion, thank you so much for being here, for coming back. I'm not going to bury the lead. We've done this before.
We have.
And we had a technical snafu, which is not normal for us, but you had an empathy for it that I can appreciate.
Yeah. In my business, you have empathy for things that aren't recorded correctly because it can really mess up your day.
Yeah, thanks. So anyway, just with that out of the way, it was a pleasure hanging out with you last time, and we don't necessarily have to do a repeat because I don't know that either of us remembers exactly
not at all
what we talked about. Perfect. But I wanted to start off, I'm obviously interested in you as a storyteller and as a writer, but you're writing recently. And I'm not a sports fan. I haven't followed a whole lot of sports, but I don't know if you were doing this before, but I've certainly noticed you doing it now. You're standing up for people, and you're specifically the piece you just wrote about the gentleman from Stanford.
I don't think we should call him a gentleman.
It's what
the high school bully.
Equal opportunity asshole.
Yeah, that's what he's called.
The opinion that you took in that piece and the way that you handled it, and I think I noticed it elsewhere in another article where you're taking the opportunity to stand up for people. Is it something you've always done, or are you feeling compelled more to do it now?
Yeah, I try to. I mean, I advocated that Stanford lets go of their head football coach in the piece you're talking about. And I usually don't do that. I usually don't try and fire people in print. This guy, it's pretty egregious. And I think, plus he's not very good at his job from what I can tell. So I don't understand why Stanford would risk its reputation, its chance to move forward with... They've made a lot of changes in their athletic department. Why they would risk it for this guy? So it was, it was pretty easy to take a strong opinion. But yes, I do try to. I mean, my editors like to say when they tell people like what my strengths are, they say she speaks truth to power. That's a lot. Those are lofty words, especially when you're talking about sports. And especially when you're talking about the world that we live in currently.
Yeah.
But I do try to not back down to the powerful people in sports who, they think that especially owners, they think they control things. Have had pretty much all of them mad at me at some point. But yeah, I mean, I think the part of the sports world that I like to operate in is kind of the intersection of sports and society, and injustices or things that are kind of a reflection of things that go on in our society at large. That sports is a way of talking about. So yeah, I think I do that a lot. I mean, if the 49ers are playing, the Atlanta Falcons on a Sunday, is my column going to look like that? No,
right.
Probably not. But in general, I like to write about issues of that dig a little deeper beyond, the box score and
right.
Especially when it is about people in power being bullies and that goes on a lot in sports. I mean,
yeah.
As you can imagine, there's a certain type of personality that can become quite powerful in the sports world. And and sometimes they need to be called on their shit.
Yeah, and so much more seems to be forgiven to a certain extent when the results are in and they're good. If the person is kind of a jerk, but they win championships.
Exactly. That's the thing. If this guy's record was 9-3 instead of 3-9, or it would be a different story. But that's not the case.
Right.
But it's more difficult when someone's very successful. I've had, Jed York does not send me Christmas cards. Joe Lacob and I have butted heads at times, and those are people who are much more successful, but
right. Well, but if it seems like you've got the kind of job where anybody in journalism, if everyone likes you, you might not be doing the best job, right? That's
if you never take a strong opinion that's going to piss some people off, then you're not
right.
Then you're not doing your job.
Sport as allegory or as like a metaphor in general I think it's interesting. And you seem to really get that in the way that you write. You're not writing explicitly about how one bully in one place is reflective of another bully in another place that we all have.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Though I did bring that up, that his leadership style seemed to be, what is now
suddenly
in vogue.
Yeah. You had a great line in the piece, something about like he was meant to have learned a lesson, but evidently the standard for learning and the coach is not the same as. Do you remember how you phrased that?
Because he said he had learned. It had been the investigations into his behavior had been learning experiences, and he'd learned from them or something. But then he did it all over again.
Right.
And so there was a second investigation. So, at Stanford, learning is supposed to be kind of a
top-notch thing.
Kind of the thing people are there for, but apparently his standard is a little bit lower than the university's.
Yeah. I promised I didn't bring you in here just to talk about Stanford or football or necessarily even sports. I know that's what you do for a living, but that's not your whole milieu. The thing that really interests me, your family, you told me some stories I do remember about your family that were really interesting. You're from Mill Valley, which I think is just in itself kind of interesting, the time that you grew up.
I did grow up in an interesting time.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of talk again, if we can, about your family. Paul and I had a moment recently. We were at a client's house, and they're showing us around, and we were both like, hey, and Paul calls out, is that a Tom Killion? It was one of your brother's pieces, like a little woodblock print, beautiful, and she, oh yeah, how hip are you guys that you recognize the Tom Killion? So there's you. There's three of you, right? There's 3 siblings.
My brother Tom, the artist, who, if you go into many homes here in Marin County or in the Bay Area, you will see a Tom Killion on the wall. He's the oldest, and then my brother Paul is a very successful law partner. He's the middle, and I'm the baby.
Yeah. 3 kids just kind of nailing it professionally. I'm not sure what their personal lives like. You seem like you've got your collective act together.
We're all pretty good. Yeah. We're all doing pretty good.
You guys are pretty close?
We are close. Yeah. It's one of the great joys of my life is that my 2 siblings still live. We all live in the county, and we're very close, and we try and see each other, get together for dinner every couple of months. We text each other a lot. But it's really... as an adult now, I realize that that's a little rare. There are a lot of people who don't get along with their siblings and don't stay in touch, especially in this weird political climate. But it's so nice to have, that we can all talk together and we're all on the same team. Same team. But even just the shared memories, the whole things that you guys have. So that leads me to ask about your folks, because clearly, when siblings are that together and that talented and that sort of driven, something hip was happening in the Killion household. Yeah. I'm not sure what was happening, but my parents, had high expectations, put a huge value on education, on reading on just doing well in school and reading as much as you can. And my dad was an attorney. He came out here to California from Minnesota right at the start of the Depression. First went to LA and tried to sell vacuum cleaners in, I believe, 1930. Not probably a time people were thinking about needing to buy a new vacuum cleaner.
Right.
And he came up to the Bay Area, and this is how long ago it was. He had his University of Minnesota degree in hand, and he went over to the law school at Berkeley, which was called Bolt at the time, and one of even back then was considered one of the finer law schools, especially on the West Coast. And he enrolled. He didn't have to apply or anything. He enrolled in law school.
Wow.
And he met my mother after World War II in the city. And my mother had been a journalist. She was working as a journalist, I think, when they met for the San Francisco Call Bulletin. I think there were 6 dailies in San Francisco at the time, and she was covering shipping news. I don't think she did it for that long, but anyway, they got married, and they lived in Carmel for a little while, and then they settled in Mill Valley. And my mom was a housewife, but I think a frustrated housewife because she had a degree from Berkeley. She was very smart, and but at the time, what was she going to do? She was going to stay home and raise us, and she really poured herself into her kids and making sure that we were, well-rounded and doing well in school. I don't think she ever would have thought, a sports writer was going to come out of that because that was not something she cared about. But so I don't know. I don't know what the chemistry was that happened. I mean, I think some of it's just luck. I
mean, your dad clearly was not a young spring chicken when you were born.
No, he was 53 when I was born.
And how old was your mom? Was she?
She was 41.
41,
so
still,
back then, like now, those are kind of standard ages of Marin County parents with little ones. But back then, my parents were so much older. Yeah. And that might have had something to do with it.
Yeah, less chaos in the house.
And especially at that time because, at least for me, maybe not so much my oldest brother, but for me, being raised in Mill Valley in the 60s, when my friends' parents, many of my friends' grandparents were the same age as my dad. Mm-hmm. And my friends' parents were, a good 2 decades younger than my mother. That was a time when women were not going to college at all or getting married right out of college and having babies right away. And so there were a lot of young women in my friend's mother's circle. And when you add that into the way Mill Valley was with kind of a hippie enclave and a lot of new ideas coming, and some of the moms were going a little crazy. My mother was not going crazy. My mother was like, no, you can't go out. No, you can't do that. No, I'm going to be home when you get home. So there was a lot of free-range children, and I was not one of them.
Yeah. Did that change, like having parents who were so much older than your friends' parents, did that change the way you related to adults?
I don't know. I think it's interesting because I think kids today relate to adults so much better than kids my age. I mean, I just was always like, that was back in the day when you called people by Mr. and Mrs. And they just seemed like others, and they kind of had their own lives. Whereas now I think, when my kids were growing up, we were did more with them, like, include them more in dinners and social, family socialization. I don't know. I could be wrong. It could just be my experience. But I do think probably having older parents who weren't as concerned about their own needs might have created some sort of stability in our house, or some sort of, and it might have made a closeness with my siblings too, because we were obviously on one generation, and they were, so music and stuff that we were understanding, it wasn't like, they
wasn't even close.
Yeah. I mean, some people's parents were like, they would steal their parents' records. Well, we didn't steal our parents' Benny Goodman records.
Well, speaking of records, I do remember you telling me that your dad had written a kind of a hit song before World War II, right?
Yeah, he did. He wrote the number one song of 1941, which was called the Hut-Sut Song.
Hut-Sut Rawson on the river, add a little brawler to it. Hut-Sut Rawson on the river, add a little brawler to it.
It was a kind of a nonsense song. It was this. It marked a time in American history when everyone else was at war, and America was not yet at war. Many people didn't think we'd ever be at war, and so there were these silly songs. It was like there was a silliness in the air because everyone was coming out of the Depression, and so he wrote this song based on. I think I told you that he grew up in Minneapolis, and so there was a huge Swedish population, and it sounds mean. I don't know that it was mean, but they would make fun of the way his Swedish classmates would talk. And he and a couple of friends who went on to become a well-known singing group called the Merrimacs wrote this silly song, kind of spoofing on Swedish words. And, I don't know, a decade... I don't know. Somehow they finally got it recorded, and it became this hit in 1941. And then Pearl Harbor happened, and no one wanted to listen to that song again. But you will find it in certain movies and TV shows, kind of because it is it marks a time.
Yeah,
it's in From Here to Eternity. It's in A Christmas Story. Yeah, so
that song's been good to the Killion household for
it's been okay.
Many,
we still
many
get
decades.
residuals. Yeah,
I love that. I don't know. There's something about like an eternity. I mean, it just sounded like your dad lived like a couple of lives before he got around to making you guys. Just
he did.
Yeah.
He practiced law. He was on a merchant marine ship in World War II, going down to the South Pacific because he was really too old to be in combat for World War II.
Yeah.
And I think that I think part of, he probably never took his family life for granted. He also had not had a nice family life growing up. His mother had died when he was quite young, and he got sent to live. He and his sister got separated and sent to live with different relatives, and on the prairies in the upper Midwest, in North Dakota and Minnesota, and he told me stories of classmates dying of the Spanish flu and stuff. So I think he did have a certain joy of having. Yeah. Being able to provide, having a more stable household than he grew up in. It wasn't always completely stable, but it was, it was nice.
Comparatively, it must have been, paradise. Just no offense to anybody in the Dakotas, but if you've been to Mill Valley and been to the Dakotas, there's a stark difference.
My dad used to, every time we would go to the city, on the way home, he would pull into Vista Point on the this side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and he'd park and he'd look at the city and he'd say, "This is the most beautiful place in the world. I don't know why anyone lives anywhere else." And as a 5-year-old, I would think, why do people live other places? I didn't really understand that not everyone has the means to get up and move to California. But I was like, yeah, you're right, and it's probably one of the reasons we're all still
You're
here.
still here. I've had a similar notion, but with an extra heaping of gratitude that not everyone wants to be here.
Right. Well, my employer, the San Francisco Chronicle, will often do these stories of why are people leaving California, and all I can say is Yahoo!
Yeah,
please
have fun.
Please keep leaving.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the country's beautiful. It's amazing. It's very interesting. You're gonna love Tex-Mex. It's so good. You're gonna love it.
Austin sounds like the place for you, but not for me.
It's great. You're gonna love it. Drive safe. Yeah. So your dad, I don't know. I'm now recalling many of the things that we talked about, and he just seemed like this sort of charming guy. And you guys shared a lot of was it him that got you into sports in the way that he did? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my dad, he grew up. Babe Ruth was playing when he was growing up. So he was always a big sports fan. He loved Bronco Nagurski, who was a running back for the Chicago Bears. And
what a name.
He, if I have this correctly, he had an opportunity to go see Bronco Nagurski play or go see Babe Ruth play, and he chose to go to the football game.
Wow.
And I think always regretted it. When the Giants arrived from New York in 1958, he was out on Montgomery Street in the ticker tape parade with my brother Tom on his shoulders, waving to Willie Mays. He was a big sports fan, but my brothers weren't really the ones who became big sports fans. I became the big sports fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my brothers could kind of, they were fine with it. They enjoyed it, but I was the one who ended up sitting, on Sunday afternoons with my dad watching football. Yeah. When I was an adolescent, and my brothers were already one was out of the house, one was on his way out of the house. It was kind of a golden age for sports in the Bay Area in terms of the A's were winning World Series, the Raiders won a Super Bowl, the 49ers were in the playoffs, always losing to Dallas, but so we kind of shared that together. Yeah, and he really kind of instilled my love of sports and my interest in, watching this thing that was happening in real time, which was a huge attraction that you didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
That was kind of the big attraction to me.
Do you think watching him enjoy it was a big part of it, or did you enjoy it on your own terms, or was it just seeing him enjoy it?
I enjoyed it on my own terms. I mean, I remember watching, it might have been the 1972 Olympics, which I think made a huge impression on me because I remember getting goosebumps and teary-eyed, watching Olga Korbut, and I was like, oh my God, what, even in my young brain, I was like, what is this power this has over me? Yeah. And then, of course, that was Munich, and that was another, that was happening in real time on our TV screens was just
mind-blowing.
Yeah, it was insane to me, and it made me, I never really was processing it now, but when I think back on it, it made me realize that sports was this thing that people wanted to manipulate, that it had this power that it could be sadly it could be a target, but it could also be this thing that brought people together. It could do all those different things.
Yeah.
So just sports to me was always very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a really wildly interesting thing.
Yeah, when people say to me, especially, I don't want to sound sexist, but usually women are like, I don't really like sports, but I like what you write. And I always want to say, well, it's because I don't really write about sports. Right. I write about
story.
Sports is the vehicle. Mm-hmm. But what I'm writing about are people and what they're doing in real time with the spotlight on them and how they handle success and how they handle failure. That's
the pageantry of it is interesting.
And the pageantry. Yeah.
The way you can look at so many history books are pointing at sport of the time to give a reference point. I mean, just even you saying like, yeah, my dad saw he had the choice between Babe Ruth or Bronco. I mean, to tell my story, be like, well, I could have seen Michael Jordan or Carrot Top. It's not really, it's like, that's where
Did you pick wrong?
No, I saw Jordan, but he had after he'd retired, he's like, he came back and played ball again. Anyway.
I saw Carrot Top when I was in Las Vegas. Carrot Top was wandering around the hotel I was staying in for the Super Bowl a year ago. It's like, ew.
Yeah.
You're
Is he
still
real
around.
jacked? Isn't he like really muscular?
Just looks weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also, I mean, we all know the power of sports. I mean,
Right,
it's no
right.
mistake that, Hitler wanted the Olympics in
Of course.
1936 as his giant propaganda machine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's funny the Olympics are such like a touchstone in people's lives. I remember the first one that I was aware of. It's like 1984, I think, or 5. I guess
84
it
was
before.
LA.
Yeah, LA. And Mary Lou Retton. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Mississippi, so that's not like, no offense, it's not the brain trust of the country necessarily. I thought Ronald Reagan was the king of America, and that was his daughter. That's just like, okay, rock and roll America, man.
Could have been.
Mary Lou Retton was my movie star presidents. Anyway, I heard somebody say recently, like, it was an Irish guy. He's like, man, I didn't really think America was a real place until I was in my 20s. I thought it was just something they made up to entertain us. Like,
That's funny.
yeah, of course the apprentice guy is bombing people in Yemen. If that sounds like something made up.
Right.
It's like,
Well,
that's real.
it does sound made up now at
Yeah,
this point.
but
Of
it's
course
real.
the Tesla guy is like...
Yeah. Anyhow, sorry, I don't mean to tangent upon tangent. Your mom in all this, at that story, I don't mean to like paint her as this oppressed woman, but that person who had their own ambitions, their own wisdom and smarts, that just put that back burner for cultural reasons for the time to deal with kids. But she had an extremely outsized influence on you, I think, as a writer, if I remember, like, or at least as a reader, right? Wasn't she?
Yeah, as a reader and a writer. I learned how to read when I was 3, and it was from sitting on her lap, and she would, read to me and run her finger along the line of what she was reading, and I would watch, and and of course when you're that age, you want the same books over and over, and I would be reading along, and she thought, oh, that's pretty cute. She's memorized it, and then I started reading other things, and she's like, oh, she hasn't memorized it. She
just knows the
can read.
formula.
Yeah. So she really instilled her love of books in all of us. She was a huge reader up to the day she died. She had lost her sight, but she would go through the books on tape through the Braille library.
Wow.
Like 5 a week. I mean, she just
Wow.
Just
ate it up.
Yeah, and we shared that love of books for forever. And then she was always a really good writer, and so she was as a lot of stay-at-home moms were at the time, very involved in the community and the PTA and the outdoor art club in Mill Valley and in all sorts of groups. And she always would be the the communications person, the person who would write the newsletter or would, so I just remember her doing that a lot. And she had a typewriter, and she sometimes she would move it into my room, and I would just love that. I would write stories, and I still have them somewhere in some boxes of these, and of course they were always just slightly altered versions of books I really liked.
Of course, yeah.
So, try and write my own magical whatever. So that was very, very much encouraged, like to write, to know that I was a good writer, to know that words were important. It was kind of, even in my little fantasies of what am I going to be when I grow up, and I was super into movies and, TV and celebrity, but I never dreamed that I would be the actress. I always dreamed that I'd be like the screenwriter.
Oh, wow.
Which was kind of funny. And that was when I went to UCLA, that was actually my intention, was was to get into that kind of writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Did your mom ever write you letters? Do you have?
Oh my gosh.
Do you still have them?
Yeah, I have a lot of them.
That's so cool.
I probably threw away too many. When I was younger. But she would write really long letters. And when I was at UCLA, because it was too expensive to have a phone call even to Los Angeles back then. Yeah, so she would write me like these long, like 8-page letters, and I've gone back through them, and I'm like, oh my God, it made me realize like what was going on with, like just organizing kind of where people were in my life and what was happening, what was going on with my dad, what was going on with my brothers at the time. So. It's nice to be able to have those still.
That's a beautiful artifact. I mean,
and it's something that people aren't going to have anymore.
Yeah.
Are you going to save your email?
Yeah. Have you digitized those or any kind of way? Or
I haven't digitized anything. I'm really bad about that. Yeah,
I highly recommend it. Just talk to anybody in LA.
Oh, believe me.
It's just like there's been an enormous boom of that sort of thing. Like, anyhow, you can either hear it. Well. It's later. We'll talk later. But the reason I ask about the letters is, it's one thing to know your mom was a writer, but then to have her communicating with someone she clearly loved a lot, and that kind of writing is so specific.
Yeah. It's also so interesting because it's cursive. Another skill that is lost. Not only is letter writing lost, cursive is definitely lost. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, we had a fairly contentious relationship all through. She was really hard on me, critical. Some of it, I think, was that frustration of the path her own life may have taken, and she. So we butted heads a lot. Luckily, she lived long enough that we were able to come out of that. So, yeah, I probably didn't appreciate those letters as much at the time as I should have. But
you can look at them now. Do you feel like that butting heads with her made you tougher in any way?
Yeah, I think it did.
Yeah, it helped you contextualize yourself. Like,
you
could say, well, she may be my mom, she may be smart, but is she right or is she wrong?
Right, that's not who I am. Yeah. I mean, she didn't really like my high school friends because they weren't smart. None of them were going off to college. I was the only one. She would always compare me to other people's daughters who were more beautiful. She could be hard on me. Yeah. I
don't. If this is too deep, it's fine. But like, how did you guys sort that out? What did you do to work out that relationship?
Well, I mean, I ended up living here, so I mean, it's not like I moved away. And just over time, I knew how important it was. When I had kids, how much she wanted to be involved, and they had a great relationship with her as a grandmother, and that obviously elevated us to a different level. And when you can butt heads with a parent, but then when you become a parent, you kind of go, oh, okay, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
And then towards the last 10 or after my dad died in 2000. She lived another 18 years, and along with my brothers, we there was a lot of caretaking is too strong a word because she always lived independently, but we were very involved in driving her places and getting her groceries and seeing her on a regular basis. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Boy, the things that will make you more empathetic, having your own kids, seeing what it takes to be a mom.
Yeah.
But because it's one thing to have those lessons taught to you, but to actually take them in and, apply them, that's not easy. Do you do that as a writer? Do you use that empathic muscle in your writing?
Well, I try to, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I think probably in fiction you do it more but you need to understand what people's motivations are and try and, figure out what where they're coming from. But at the same time, in a daily journalism, you don't really have time to ponder it too much.
Right, yeah. You can't overthink the story and have it come out on time and in short enough form. But you've done longer form stuff. I mean, you've written 2 books with female athletes. Mm-hmm. The one in particular with the I'm forgetting her name now, the softball player,
Jennie Finch.
Jennie Finch.
Yeah.
Like to write. And that one, did you write it in her voice?
No, sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of. That one was more of a aimed at. It wasn't really a narrative. It was more aimed at lessons she's learned from sports that she wants to pass on to adolescent girls. Was kind of the target audience. The Hope solo book was really in her voice and kind of telling her story. So that was
which that to me takes a lot of empathy. To be able to write in someone else's voice and represent.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not sure how well I did it, but I tried to, and she has a very strong voice, and I spent significant time with her, so I think it was, and her story is kind of mind-boggling, so it was. It was fun.
I'll bet.
It was fun to slip into a beautiful 6-foot-tall athlete's body and tell their story.
Yeah. That's the fun kind of empathy. Yeah. Really interesting. I mean, so you started reading obviously extremely young. When did your interest in writing peak? When did you realize, I love this, I want to do this?
Probably sitting at the typewriter in my room when I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade, But then, as I went through school, I was, anything that involved writing and did not involve math, I was really good at.
At what point in your life did you know your mom had been a writer?
Probably always.
Always, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was part of the family story.
Yeah,
like
and
mom
my dad as a labor arbitrator and as an attorney, there's a lot of writing.
Sure.
I think I realized how much writing later on. When I was at UCLA, I worked in the law library, and I looked up some of his arbitration decisions, and I was like, I never would have had the chance to, and that's a lot of writing. And I remember him, like laboring over things, late into the night. So writing.
It's just part of the whole family.
Yeah, and my brothers, they were really good writers. My brother Paul was, my middle brother was he's 3 years ahead of me. So when he was a senior in high school, I was a freshman, and he was the editor-in-chief of the TAM News, the high school paper, and he was like, "Yeah, you got to do." I don't think you could do it as a freshman, but he said you got to do the paper. And it's great having an older sibling because you either do exactly what they didn't do or you do what they, and he was a really good student. So I was like, okay.
Just follow your lead.
I'll follow your lead. I'll take those teachers and I'll work on the paper.
Cool.
And that was kind of the big, the big moment of, looking back on it, I could have just been another kid who worked on the paper and then went off to school, but I became the sports editor because no one else really wanted to do it. And so my best friend, who's still my best friend, she was the editor-in-chief. I was a sports editor, and we just kind of ruled that place, which was fun. And then I wrote this, I think I told you this, the Serial.
Yes.
So the Serial was a very famous serialized story that was going on at the time in the Pacific Sun here in Marin County, written by Sarah McFadden. And it was scandalous, and, it was people in the hot tubs and, partner switching among, couples on the cul-de-sac and all sorts of stuff. So I was writing a spoof called The Serial, Cereal, about the kids at TAM, and each episode would be labeled like Frosted Flakes or Fruit Loops, or, depending on the subject matter. And it was kind of scandalous. It was all who's smoking pot, where are they, who's dating whom, who's cheating on whom. And everyone was very loosely identified. And it was kind of a big rush to see the paper would come out in stacks, in the buildings, and you'd see people like grab it and go right to that and be talking about it and who was who. And some people got really mad at me. And I think I kind of found my voice. Now, I wouldn't become a columnist for another 15 years after that, probably. But I think I kind of found a voice doing that in a way that I probably didn't until I started writing a column.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that just continued to fuel whatever I had in me that said, this is what I do. I'm a writer.
Yeah. Well, and I know this is an impossible question, but I want to hear your answer to it anyway. Your voice, like, what does that mean to you to have your voice?
It means, well, literally, it kind of means writing the way I speak, writing in a conversational tone. It means asserting, my point of view. It means grabbing my reader's attention and making sure they stick with me, if hopefully to the end. So yeah, and just kind of a style of writing. And I think as young writers, you try out voices, you try out other people's voices.
Sure.
If you love Hemingway, and I do love Hemingway. And so I do not have long run-on sentences.
Yeah.
I like brevity in my sentence structure. But Dave Barry, the humor writer, is a friend of mine, and I am ashamed to remember that I used to try and like kind of steal, flat out steal like phrases from him.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think people try out different voices, and then they kind of, once they get more confident, they kind of settle into their own.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing to think about what your voice was and what it is, but you write more than just columns. Like, you've written fiction and you've helped other people tell their stories. Do you think there's a through line that's always your voice, or are you able to switch in and out?
I hope I can switch in and out. Yeah. I hope my column voice doesn't. I think probably the way I write, the way I organize sentences and paragraphs is probably similar throughout. But I would hope that the tone would change depending on what I'm writing. But I've been trying to write some fiction now, and it's something I'm very. I'm kind of aware of that my characters all have to have different sounds to them,
Sure.
and it's hard.
Yeah. Multiple character. Is it a timepiece, or where are they?
They're in Mill Valley.
They're in Mill Valley. Okay. So you know those voices for sure.
Yeah.
Did you go to Strawberry? Were you in that?
No.
Okay.
But I went to Old Mill, but I was the same grade as the kids
Strawberry
who sang.
Hill.
Yeah. And it's sad. I just went to the memorial service for one of those kids who I was in 6th grade with.
Wow.
And they played it at the, and it was just. It's such a talk about a time capsule,
Yeah.
It's funny because even when that song came out, it made me. I could understand that there was a parallel between my dad's song, because it was, a time and a place, and it was, I think, the summer of 1969.
Was it 69?
Yeah, I know people, and I think it was 69. We were 2nd graders.
Yeah. I know it's, for context, listener, we're talking about Rita Abrams' famous song from the Strawberry Hill.
Mill Valley, California. That's my home.
Talking about Mill Valley, California, that's my home.
Oh, it's such a cute.
People would come back and say, or they would get letters from their family members' sons in Vietnam, and they were hearing it. It was
Yeah, so heavy.
Yeah.
So heavy, but so sweet.
so
and
cute.
It's just, it's the cutest
It's
song
like,
ever.
really? That got radio airplay all across
Massive.
the country?
It was a huge hit. I think I've told you my good friend was the producer on that record.
Yeah, you did.
And put it together with, with all these kind of hip musicians, and they made a great song, and they're still friends. He and Rita are still pals to this day. It's
Yeah.
60 years later, 40. Anyway, that the reason I was asking about your Mill Valley, bona fides. It's such a specific place to have grown up with. Like, I think you told me you had a really unusual. Where did you go to school? Was it something unusual or no?
Yes.
What was
well,
your
I went
grade
to Old Mill School, and we were. Our principal was featured on the cover of Life magazine as this new age educator.
Yeah.
And when I was in third grade, I was in something. They took the school auditorium and turned it into the Learnatorium, and it was 75 kids, third, fourth, and fifth grade. I don't think there were any second graders in there. 3 teachers, a whole bunch of teachers' aides, teaching student teachers from Oberlin College. How they all got there, I don't know. That was so weird. Like, for years, I was like, I don't know where Oberlin is. Maybe it's just like across in the East Bay or something. It turns out it's in Ohio.
Yes, it is.
And we had like pods, there weren't walls in there. And we had to, I remember refrigerator boxes like put together to make tunnels, and like a rope swing in the middle of the class. Like, it was chaos. And I remember coming home and crying because they made us write up our own learning contracts. Okay.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like 8, turning it on to 9, I think. And so I've written my own learning contract, and I'm an ambitious kid, right, as we've established.
Yes.
And I'm going to write a report on the American Revolution. Okay, I don't know how to write a report. And I remember crying, and my brother Tom had this, by this point, he was too old for this picture book, but we still had it. It was something he'd had when he was like 8 years old. It was a kind of a big, big square book about the American Revolution. And I remember him sitting on my bed with me in my bedroom, and he was telling me, okay, this is important, and we'd write it down, like make an outline, and we'd write it down. Like, I remember that so specifically.
Wow.
Because I was like losing it because I had to fulfill my learning contract, and I got really sick that winter. I think I had pneumonia, and my mom taught me my multiplication tables while I was homesick, and I don't know that I ever would have learned them otherwise. So it was just there was a lot of kind of crazy stuff going on at Old Mill School. My mom, after that, put me in the strictest teachers, 4th grade, and relatively strict 5th grade. Then at our middle school, which was brand new when I got there, we were put in pods, and each pod had a name: sun, wind, sea, or wood. And sun was painted yellow. The lockers were yellow. The carpet was yellow. The walls were yellow. Wait, that was wind. Sun was orange. I was in sun. Everything was orange. Sea was blue. Everything was this kind of dark blue, and it was kind of depressing. Wood was green, and yeah, and we again. I was put in as a 6th grader. I was put in a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade mixed class. And I'm there with like my tights and my saddle shoes. Mm-hmm. And there are girls with giant breasts and blue eyeshadow on, like tongue kissing their boyfriends on the first day of school in the same class. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just a little kid. It was, they had some really, really funky ideas about what was good for kids. Yeah. And it created a lot of chaos. I mean, and a lot of chaos in some kids' lives. And again, my parents really, mostly my mom, was really on top of it. And I was, I did not go back to that classroom for 7th or 8th grade. And there were a lot of kids who were not learning a lot.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I just I should have touched on that way earlier in our conversation because we turned you into an adult and I've brought you back down to but that continual grounding force of your folks and even your brother and your brothers, I would imagine. It's kind of a wild thing that, growing up in Mill Valley, this at that time especially was so hippie and so new age and so kind of like almost specifically weird to be around that and have such a hip, grounding, I don't know, ambitious sort of upbringing makes a unique person, more so than just like if you were just a weirdo, Like,
yeah. Well, there were a lot of really unique and interesting people in Mill Valley at the time, and a lot of their kids. But there was a lot of, there was a famous documentary about Marin County called "I Want It All Now," that kind of was about the hot tubs and the peacock feathers and all that. But and I was very rebellious against my grounding parents.
I can imagine.
I mean, I knew. I figured out pretty early on that as long as I got good grades, I could do pretty much, So, I mean, I smoked my first pot when I was like in 6th grade, and I, as long as I got good grades, I was doing stuff I shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah.
I had to also be home. Like I was not, some kids, their parents didn't mind if they called it like late at night and said, I'm spending the night somewhere else. That was not okay in my house. But so it was a balance. I tried to rebel to a certain extent.
Right. Yeah. Just a toe in the water of wild and nope, back in. Well, I mean, that's, that almost sounds like a job in journalism. If you meet the deadline, you can be as wild and crazy as long as you get it in,
Yep.
Yeah. Really interesting. Well, whatever, mix of nature and nurture came together to create the Killion clan, it's done good. Your parents did good.
They did do good.
The crazy
and they knew it. They knew
barnatorium.
it before they died. They were pretty, in fact, embarrassingly proud,
Yeah. Did they know your kids at all? Did they get to meet your kids? That's cool. That's really
that was my dad. My daughter remembers him. She was 5, 6 when he died. No, 5. So she remembers him, but not that well. And my son was 8, so he remembers him a little better. And then, they both were very close to my mother.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. Which with older parents, that's something, I was always concerned about. Like, how long? I mean, that was something that.
Did you get to know your grandparents very well at all?
I knew one of them.
Yeah.
My mom's mom was still alive when she died when I was in like 7th grade, but she was not, much of the end of her life was in nursing homes, and only my oldest brother remembers her as kind of a vital woman who could drive, and and then my mom's dad and my my dad's dad both died before I was born, and then of course his mother had died when he was young.
Are you anywhere near being a grandma yet? Is that in your future? Maybe.
My daughter's married and she's 30, and I know she wants to have kids, so I would say yes.
How do you feel about that? How does that land with you, the idea of being a grandma?
I'm excited.
Yeah?
I would be excited as long as it's the right time for them. Yeah, and I would want to be super involved. And my daughter teaches, and so she would always, she'd be working, and so I would like to be in a place where I could help her out.
Super hip, cool grandma,
Yeah, and my mother-in-law and my mom both helped me out a lot because it is not easy being the cost of daycare and everything else. So that's I don't know that my son doesn't seem to think he'll ever have kids. I don't know. You never know.
Yeah, you never.
And then my partner's son and his new wife, they'll probably be the first ones to have kids.
Yeah.
So yeah,
All right, you'll get to practice.
yeah. There will be grandchildren.
Nice,
For sure.
great. Well, I'm glad somebody's breeding. I'm definitely not, but I'm glad somebody is.
Yeah, you got to have a leap of faith to do it right now. I think I'm kind of always shocked when Anyway, I don't want to get too dark. I have no judgment, but
people had kids during the Civil War. People had kids during the World War II. Like all
they
the
did,
World Wars.
But women didn't really have much choice.
Right. True.
Now women have a choice,
right.
At least for the moment, at least in California.
Yeah.
And the climate thing is a real thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's strange times, but the ray of hope are people like yourself, and the memories. I think it's a good thing to reflect and look back. Just like you said with your siblings, you can either know what to do or what not to do, and that's the lesson of history. And talking to you about your family is kind of hip. Hearing about, older parents who made good choices and raised interesting and cool kids. So that to me is a ray of hope in all this weird,
I hope
otherwise potentially bleak times.
I know. Believe me. You just concentrate on the good things.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you again for your patience and your empathy and your super interesting story and the Huts Hut tune and all the great things that we got to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks for talking to me again.
One more thing before we sign off. If, let's just say this hypothetical grandchild, maybe multiple grandchildren, if you could like beam a message to them in the future, what would you want to say to those little kids? On the
so
spot,
many things,
right? Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I would say just, enjoy your life and the beauty of the world and the, beauty of books. And if you're lucky enough to have your siblings, and, don't worry too much about what everyone tells you about, what you have to be or what you have to do or money. Don't worry too much about money. Because if you love your life, it'll probably come. Yeah.
It's good advice.
I find it a little hard because while I'm not really a child of the 60s, I mean, I was born in the 60s, but my I'm not a hippie child, but I find it discouraging, just the selfishness and greed of the world that we live in today, and just kind of a little baffling. And I kind of blame my own generation. I mean, we were the yuppies, we were the ones who were super materialistic in the 80s and put making money first. That was, the Reagan era and, the king. And
Mary Lou's dad.
And his daughter, Mary Lou.
I remember him.
But, yeah. And so it's very discouraging to see that in our society, mostly in our American society. I don't think it's that way around the world. But
well, it's at least, I don't know, having good influence is the best you can hope for, is to be a good influence. I had a guy tell me once, I just want to be a good ancestor. So I thought that was nice.
That's a great thing.
That's a pretty good ambition,
Yeah, I'd like to be a good ancestor.
Yeah, no, I can get behind that.
Yeah,
I don't have
that's our goal.
Yeah, I don't have any offspring coming, but somehow tangentially, I'll be a good great uncle
and a good influencer from from beyond.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you, Ann.
Thank you.